watches can improve. All that, and I am sharing your viewer wrist shots here on Watches and Vintage Timepieces live right now. And if you want to buy, trade, or sell, reach out to me directly, tmaso@thewatchbox.com. Your direct inquiry line for purchase and pricing of anything you see on my social media or our website. Viewer wrist shots. First, let's take a look and see who's here. Eddie Landsberg, first, and a favorite. Richard Combs from South Florida. PT Patrick S. We got Thomas M. Turkischer Meister from Turkey. Neo. Enrique Cassiano. We have Miroslav R. and, of course, MCC Le Chinois. Miroslav, thank you for joining us from Belgrade, staying up late in continental Europe with us tonight. Let's see what you guys have got for me. Viewer wrist shots number 1. James B., also a member of our Facebook group, shares the stunning 50-piece Blancpain 50 Fathoms Bathyscaphe Mocarin fade dial, no date dial, immaculate and perfect. Beautifully framed. Azam A in Saudi Arabia sends a sharp shot of his vintage Universal Genève golden shadow on the wrist. JCS strikes a pose with his Chopard, Louis-Ulysse Chopard 8200 Sport chronometer. And John V in his Seiko King Turtle dive watch hit the road with a friend. Furry friends, I love watches and dogs. I love watches and wheels. Send them all to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on these pixels. Let's see who's joining in. GT350R from Syracuse, New York. We got Patrick R saying, what's up, Tim? What's up, Patrick? We're just getting started. We got Joseph B in the house. Mr. No Date. Junior Johnson from Michigan. We have Oil Monkey Watches, who is a member of the Tim Maso Facebook group. More on that in just a moment. We've got Federico T. from Tuscany joining in, staying up late again in Europe, along with Clive Williams from London. Zeus87 is in the house. Edward Ledden from Sweden. Victor from Toronto. Jenks72 from Wales. And Paul R. getting up early in Manila. I also see John Watchsmith from Harrogate, UK, joining in our chat box. Guys, sound off. And if you want to sound off when the fun stops on YouTube, switch platforms and follow me to Facebook. I have a new Tim Maso Facebook group. We have over 800 members just in the last week. This is a place where we can share comments, photos, the video exchanges, the GIFs and the memes that we could never share in the comment threads below these videos or in the chat box during these videos. So Talking Time with Tim Maso. Will we change the name? Probably, but it's going to be the same address. Please open up another window on Facebook and join me there. That's where the fun continues after the show. Now, talking about Rolex, the total experience in 2020. Some brands have it all. They're household names, blue chip properties. They sell everything they can produce to an insatiable and ravenous public. They control their images with iron fists and a deft balance of supply against demand. These companies have names like Ferrari, Apple, Louis Vuitton, and yes, Rolex. They are all part of that elite cadre. But that's not to say they're perfect. Occasionally, an ill-proportioned Ferrari California, a car that I nevertheless still enjoy, ushers a Portofino that tacitly admits the faults of the original with a redesign. Apple, these days, spins hits like the Rolling Stones, but its decade in the Windows 95 wilderness of the 1990s is a sobering reminder of the cost of complacency and the fact that even with genius, success is not guaranteed. To that end, what can Rolex, the biggest name in watches and the strongest brand in horology, do to improve from its present imperious position as the industry leader? While the watches themselves are regarded as solid, Rolex's great triumph has been its three-headed command of its supply, its dealers, and its image. And here's what Rolex can do to improve on all three fronts. Let's check the chat box real quick because I can see some folks are joining in. We've got producer AKA from Mexico. We've got quite a few friends I haven't seen in a while. Patrick Suze. We've got Patrick R saying, what's up once again? What's up, my man? We've got, I'm going to try this, but Dibyoyodi M from St. Louis. Thanks for joining in. Marcus G, he of the Pugs, live in the chat box. And Joe Tyson of Apex, North Carolina. Guys, thanks so much for joining in. I see Ahmad B is opining, I like Windows 98. Well, we all have our predilections for obsolete software now, don't we? So first things first, let's take a look at a few more of your watches. Jason M. of Cleveland, Ohio showcases his Breitling Chronomat 44 with in-house caliber B01. He wears it well. Devin M. combines watches and wheels with the Subaru Outback XT in blue and matching Tudor Black Bay Blue. Dean N. of the UK explodes off the screen with this action shot of the Panerai Luminor submersible on his wrist as God intended in the water. By the way, Dean is a member of our Facebook group, and you can see more of his photography, which is so good I probably could have given him the entire section of wrist shots this evening. So, one more, we've got Soma R from Hungary, one of our friends in Central Europe, taking flight with his Fortis Flieger Pro and MiG-29 Strike Fighter. Watches and wings, we don't get too many of them, but they are spectacular when we do. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. All right, guys, so let's talk about the first and most urgent issue in Rolex's path towards self-improvement. How great can become greater. Maybe not perfect, but you can definitely move the mark by addressing Cellini, and we need to talk about Cellini dress watches. First, does Rolex even need them? The original idea during the 1960s was that Rolex would evolve a line of watches that would be, I don't want to say discretionary, because even at the time their sports watches were considered luxurious compared to the alternatives. But the idea that you would now have an array, a quiver, a panoply of Rolex watches in your inventory rather than just one good watch, that was a product of the 1960s, and thus the Rolex Cellini line was born. Cellini dress watches were designed to be different from the hard-edged sports watches, and given that fact, it's worth asking, in a best-case scenario, what Cellini could be and should be today if Rolex were to decide to tweak the formula. So here's where we are right now. After Rolex's first ultra-luxe dress watch, the King Midas, and these dress watch options overwhelmingly have automatic movements, minimal water resistance at 50 meters, not much compared to the professional watches. I'm not sure I would swim with them, but the movement specifications nevertheless are very similar in power reserve, rate, architecture to the sports watches. Internally, they're a lot more similar to the sports watches than they are externally. And also, in spite of sponsored pro athletes, sponsored celebrities, and at least one unsponsored use by a former president, Barack Obama, Cellini doesn't get the same buzz as the steel sports watches or even the precious metal versions of the steel sports watches. Honestly, I have to say this surprises me because I saw the meteorite and enamel, partially meteorite and enamel Cellini moon phase of 2017 as a breakthrough watch for the Cellini sub-brand. I thought this was going to be a game changer that altered perspectives and finally launched Rolex's red gold-headed stepchild into the mainstream. But after initial fanfare, even the ardor for this standout model subsided. So a change is in order for the Rolex dress watch collection. We know this because they're not as successful as the sports watches. People don't talk about them as much. They don't make the same appearances on social media. And when you go to a Rolex dealer, in general, you're going to have your pick of Cellinis. So one option, and this is probably the nuclear option, is to fold the Cellini line and just focus on the Datejust and the Datejust. Think about this for a moment. A lot of people already think of the Datejust and the Datejust as the Rolex dress watches. They either don't know about Cellini or don't care about Cellini. And this is sort of backed by the fact that Rolex only offers the Datejust in precious metals, and it offers many different precious metal and gem set options for both the Datejust and the Datejust, meaning functionally, these could absolutely be the Rolex dress watches. They're also highly water resistant, better established than the Cellinis, and in as much as they take advantage of the oyster-style case, they are also more closely linked to Rolex's standout design icon, and thereby only a bridge removed, or 1 degree we'll say, not a full Kevin Bacon, but 1 degree removed from the sub, the GMT, and the Daytona. Another option is to consider Cellini an upgrade, a badge, if you will, to reestablish the identity of Rolex's already robust sports watch line. To wit, if you were to simply say there will now be Cellini versions of the GMT, of the Sub, of the Milgauss, of the Explorer 2, of the Daytona, that would allow Rolex to take already strong model line branding and add, if you will, a luxe model. Back in the late 1950s, Jaeger-LeCoultre did exactly this with the Geophysic. There was the E168, which was the standard Geophysic technician's watch. It was basically a very high-end haute de gamme Milgauss. It was from that ilk. But there was also the E169, which was a precious metal tapered lug dress watch using the Geophysic running gear. And that would be exactly what Cellini could be as an upgrade or perhaps an alteration of the character without diluting the Sub, the GMT, and of course, your other Rolex core professional watches. Think about it. We're not that far away from this. Precious metal Daytonas on a strap. These are already a yellow gold Rolex Submariner, black bezel, black dial, black leather strap, luxe imprint on an existing successful Rolex sports watch. And I don't think that's a wrong answer. Does this lack in grace compared to a Calatrava? Does it lack in presence compared to a Longa 1? No, in both cases, this is fully competitive. This could be the face of Cellini. You could also have some small refinements, for instance, engraved rather than printed dials. And if you look at that Sub, maybe we can go full screen. I'm not sure that we have the tech, but we're going to try. But if you look at that dial, there's an awful lot of text on that dial. If all of that were replaced with the Cellini script engraved down at 6 o'clock and the Rolex crown at 12 o'clock, it would improve the upscale aesthetic that already succeeds on its own terms with a strap and yellow gold case, creating something even more unique, clean, and better defined. By changing Cellini to a trim level on existing models, the top trim level, you would double down and focus undivided attention and marketing money on Rolex's already strongest watches. That worked for Mercedes-Benz, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but let's jump straight into the box and see what you guys are saying about this. Edward Ledden is saying, I know that Lotus founder Colin Chapman used to wear a date. That's an interesting point. I wonder if it was an 1803. I'd love to see a wrist shot. We have a question from Patrick Shields. A jocular inquiry. Hi, Tim. How aerodynamic are the sunglasses? Enough that they don't fly off my head when I'm on my bike, but I haven't taken them airborne. Let's take a quick look right here. Matthew G saying, somehow if Rolex were to reinvent its dress line, I think they need a different name than Cellini at this point. I think the name bores people and puts them off. All right, so the idea that because of long-term in the shadow of the sports watches, maybe Cellini's acquired a little bit of baggage even? That's definitely possible. And then right here, we have a comment from Enrique saying, if I were a drug dealer, I'd be rocking a Constant and Chaikin Joker. Not wrong, a bit off topic, but not wrong. And then right here, we have Emily N saying, just release a different Datejust every few years with different text colors and the fanboys would go nuts. I would go one step further and say if you were to bring back the Stella dials for Datejust and Date-8 models, again, you could just eliminate Cellini and call those the dress watches. You'd sell them, every single one of them, even in precious metal. And then right here, we have Edward Ledden saying, people think about the Date-8 as a drug dealer's watch, and here I am feeling like an old timer. I used to think that the watch of choice for drug dealers and gangsters was the Rolex Daytona Gold, and you might have a winner right there. Kay Kyle is saying, all of the other lines have great competitors, but for a lot lower price too, so I don't know if that is the main, I'm missing the antecedent comment for that. But right here, Jetty K is saying, Tim, the Cellini date in blue, and I'm assuming white gold metal, is the one to get. Okay, and then Mr. No Date is just saying there are too many better dress watches than Cellini for the money. And I sort of agree with all you guys, which is why I think maybe just an upscale trim level for the sports watches is the way to go with Cellini. Because this worked for Mercedes-Benz, let's talk about it. The first attempted revival of the pre-war German Maybach ultra-luxury car line back in 2002, frankly, It was a failure, although it ran from 2002 to 2011 before the brand was finally shut down in 2013. Maybach divided company resources and confused customers who thought they were buying Daimler's best product when they purchased a Mercedes S-Class or SL. With Maybach, they were then told, no, Mercedes-Benz is not the best car we can build. This damaged the core brand. But today, Maybach has become successful as an apex-level trim on Mercedes-Benz brand products. You're going to see it on the GL SUV. We're already seeing it on the S-Class since 2015. For example, S600 S-Class Maybach has been a banner product for Mercedes because you have a higher level of Mercedes-Benz product without diluting the Mercedes brands. Maybach and Mercedes are now one. Could Cellini and Submariner and Daytona and GMT also be one? That is the question. Cellini level subs, GMTs and Daytonas could borrow the Maybach Mercedes model. And let's think of ways we could enrich these products. Emily, you were talking about colored dials on the Datejusts. Consider this. On Cellini sports watches, you could get one of the tiger stripe cases. Remember the precious metal in multiple colors striped through the Prince dress watches of the 1920s and 30s. Tiger stripe cases in a Daytona, tell me that wouldn't detonate the internet. I know it would. And ultimately, perhaps full precious metal bezels. Today, when you see ceramic on a Rolex bezel, you think, okay, sports watch. Maybe the full precious metal bezels should be saved for the Cellini trim level. Okay, let's shift gears right here. We got NATO Steve joining in from Auckland. Welcome, my man, on the other side of the world, getting up early with me. And then right here, let's jump right to the end. We have Andrew M. joining in. We have Martin H. saying, which car brand equals Rolex and which version is Cellini? Here's the problem. If you ask me what car brand is Rolex these days, I'd probably say Lexus. The standard, the one that always works, the no grief, the brand that has the strongest resale value. I would say you've got to compare Rolex to Lexus these days, not Mercedes-Benz, because while I still love Mercedes as a brand, and I've always been more of a Mercedes guy than a BMW guy, I have to say that since the Jürgen Schrempp era of the mid to late 1990s through early 2000s, the brand hasn't been the same to me, and that's because of quality problems during that period. So if I have to compare Rolex to a brand, it's going to be the standard in the luxury space, which is Lexus. As for Cellini, that's a tough question. Lexus hasn't built too many cars that failed to go mainstream, but I would say it's almost like the F-Series Lexus. The high performance models that the typical Lexus customer really just doesn't have an interest in. That would be Cellini. That's a favorable comparison to Cellini because the F models and the F Sport models are cool, but again, just outside the mainstream of the brand. So let's talk a little bit about something that could represent an entirely different direction for Cellini, and that's going way upscale. Think about a Cellini watch today. It's mostly a more expensive Rolex because it's made of precious metal, not because of the way it's finished or the way it's designed or the volume in which it's produced, mostly just because it's going to be made of gold. But imagine if that were different. Rolex could trade volume and accept maybe 1,000 to 5,000 Cellini sales a year in return for Lange-like levels of quality, a Lange und Zona quality casebacks on Rolex Cellini models. Think about this. Steel sports watches provide all the volume Rolex would ever need. With steel alone, Rolex could easily sell 1 million watches if that's what it wants to do. It has that kind of brand equity and distribution network. So gold Datejusts and Day-Dates, also platinum Day-Dates, already provide volume dress watch sales. If Rolex wants to sell a lot of dress watches, it's already sort of doing that with the Day-Dates and Datejusts. So as with the 2005 to 2014 Cellini prints, every Rolex Cellini, if we went upscale, and I mean way upscale, could potentially have a display caseback with a movement designed to be seen, finished accordingly, and if Rolex really wants to put a point on this, with micro rotor or peripheral rotor automatics, take Cellini so far upscale that it becomes aspirational even for precious metal Rolex buyers and becomes a true halo product for the brand. This vision of a decadent Cellini would truly do justice to the namesake Benvenuto Cellini, the famously immodest yet talented 16th century Italian goldsmith, and it would do justice to the legacy of the 1964 King Midas limited edition, the price of which would have bought a substantial luxury car, including a Mercedes, back in 1964. One move I don't think Rolex should take with Cellini is to offer titanium or steel versions of the existing Cellini line. Now, if they want to do what F. Pijorn did and make a special model in low volume in a base metal, like the Chronomètre Bleu in tantalum, I should say, then that's a great idea. But if you just take the current Cellini models and decide you're going to make them in steel instead of gold, then they really just become even more diminished. Because if you're going to buy a steel Rolex, you're going to buy a steel sports watch, stay precious metal, or if they become steel, tantalum, or titanium, that should be in conjunction with moving them way up market and making them much more exclusive. Jumping into the box right here, we've got lots of you joining in. We've got almost 300 people already, and we're only halfway through this thing. We got a question. Tim, is this your only jacket? It needs care. I realize it does need a little bit of care. It's the only one I have lying around the office. It was a gift from my friend Mark Cho of the Armory. I think this one's called the City Hunter. It's a fun piece that I like, and it pairs well with my casual attire. And then, we have a question from Neo. Tim, how many juicy watch nuggets are you currently aware of, but not able to disclose due to NDAs? How many nuggets? I would say roughly a 10 piece for what is it? 10 for 2 these days at Wendy's? I'd say about that many nuggets. 10 for $2. And then right here we have Edward Ledden asking, Tim, would Adrian Newey approve of your sunglasses from an aerodynamic point of view? I doubt it. They're not nearly expensive enough for his tastes. And then right here, Abdul is saying Rolex would definitely blow all our expectations with something outside the box with Cellini. I would love to see that happen. And then Eric Hanover saying Cellini equals Lexus SC430. That's a little bit brutal, although I will mention, as a fan of orphan cars and weird models, I do kind of dig it. And then right here, Eddie likes sports cars, not Formula One, so I'm not sure I could pick. And then we've got Edward saying, hi Tim, you showed a Cellini several months ago. I can't remember the model name, but it had hinged lugs about 36 millimeters. It was really beautiful. I would like to hear more about that from the big R. The hinge lugs. Yeah. That, I want to say, that was like the Cellini Cestello or something along those lines. And it might have been the Cellinium. Those are the two models that come to mind. And then right here, we've got Dimitri R joining in from Ecuador. Okay, then we have K. Kyle saying, hi Tim, a while back I asked for advice on how to get a job in the watch world at a young age. Followed your advice and got my first job interview next Thursday at the Breitling Boutique. I'm glad to hear that. Let me know how it goes. And if you want to, I don't know, sparring partner to warm up, give me a ring. We'll practice. And then we have a question from Luis Molina. What is your favorite Alango Unzona? I would say the Zeitwerk in white gold. That's fairly easy. I love that model. Okay, jumping back to our regular program. Let's talk about Rolex. Bring in Mr. Manners for Charm School. This is a problem not with Rolex watches, but with some Rolex dealers. There is a right way and a wrong way to give bad news, especially when money and wait lists are involved. This is particularly important for Rolex since it works through third-party authorized dealers, unlike most Swatch and Richemont brands, and heck, even Seiko and Grand Seiko. Rolex doesn't own its own boutiques, which means it needs to train people at third-party vendors in order to control the message. Now, Rolex generally does this quite well, at least where conveying facts is concerned. How could the experience be improved? Let's take a look. Fundamentally, every Rolex dealer will need to explain delays and wait lists for popular models, pricing, the lack of discounts, and occasional price increases. To wit, wait list public relations. Rolex needs a sort of dealer boot camp for explaining tact and tactful tactics. So what does this mean? Let's do a quick rehearsal. I'm a potential customer of a Rolex Submariner. We're going to play act here, especially a walk-in customer with no prior watch experience and no understanding of the Rolex issues as they relate to supply and demand. I can deal with waiting if it's explained respectfully, and here's an example of how that would work. Sir, Rolex production remains tightly controlled to protect the value of your investment when you take delivery, to ensure that it will always remain valuable, and to assure that your Submariner, or GMT, or Daytona, will continue to be a coveted collectible for years to come. The waiting period is how Rolex keeps the faith with its previous buyers and its future customers. That's reasonable. You may not love the answer, you might not be satisfied, but it's reasonable, and it's unlikely to elicit a sour reaction. Now here's how you would not explain that to a walk-in client. Yeah, don't even ask about the wait. It's years long, the wait list is full, and you're way too late. First of all, that's sort of passive-aggressive. Second, it's just offensive. It's needless. If there's a kind, thoughtful way to diffuse that situation, to tell a guy the bad news without being a bad dude, you should do that. You're the white glove. You're the tip of the spear for Rolex. You can find a way to do this with tact. And I think maybe a little bit more training so we hear less of these horror stories at the dealer level would go a long way. Now, we could also talk about setting expectations on pricing. But first, here's how not to explain the wait list to a walk-in client. So here's the worst possible scenario. This just came to light. Okay, if you want to buy a platinum Day-Date and a ladies' Datejust in addition to the steel Submariner, we'll see what we can do. That's the worst answer you can get. That's a bad dealer. I don't think that's common, but it's not unheard of. Okay, pricing. Back to another difficult topic, because with Rolex, in general, as when shopping at Tesla, the price is the price. So here's the right way to do it. Sir, the pricing on Rolex watches is firmer than other brands due to the company's interest in preserving its good name, protecting past customers, and ensuring uniformity across its markets. That's okay. That's factual. It's smooth, it's acceptable, there's nothing confrontational about it. Versus, say, this. Absolutely not. There's no discount ever. Don't even ask because it doesn't happen. Not only has that exact line been issued, and I've heard it firsthand, but the table smack was also part of the presentation. This should never happen. And again, this is just a matter of training people. There needs to be a boot camp for teaching tact and manners. And I think this is one way a company that will always be slightly behind the demand curve can help to diffuse a situation that often becomes unpleasant. And you really don't want to hear, but if you buy a platinum Day-Date and a ladies' Datejust, we'll see what we can do. Again, that is the worst way to approach this situation. There's also non-prejudicial treatment. A lot of Rolex dealers do a great job at this. I've also experienced other vendors, other boutiques, and hell, even Tourneau has done a great job of treating people with respect when they walk in off the street wearing shorts and a t-shirt. But when any person walks into a Rolex dealer, that person deserves the benefit of the doubt. Only jumping to attention when a known previous buyer or certain profile arrives is a mistake that no AD should make. And these are mistakes that are still made regularly. You never know. That guy in the t-shirt and shorts might be looking to buy a platinum Day-Date and a ladies' Datejust. So, some Rolex dealers do a great job of managing expectations, but you never hear about those. W. Edwards Deming is a demigod at Toyota and well known in Japan, but surprisingly obscure in his home nation, the United States. Now, while he's generally associated with statistical quality control and engineering, the fact is his most relatable insight dealt with word of mouth in marketing and public relations and its power to affect perceptions down the line. He would always say that when you build a quality product or deliver a quality service, and in the case of dealer perceptions, we're talking about service, the people who get good service become your best advertisers and your best salesmen. The people who get a bad experience, they are going to be worse than you can possibly overcome with any amount of money in advertising and customer relations. So word of mouth is a make or break. And at the dealer level, simply training manners can go a long way towards creating good experiences and many independent advertisers for your brand. Let's take a look at the chat right here. Mr. No Date, I deliberately dress down and then watch when watch shopping with authorized dealers that don't know me, and I wear a swatch to see what the customer service is really like. Right here I see Keystar G60 saying, I'm the guy in the shorts and a t-shirt. Right here, Edward Ledden is saying, if you're going to smack the table, do it with your fist. Damn right. If you're going to be ballsy and bravado and bluster at your customer, you might as well smack the table with the fist and not the palm to show you're serious. Right here, we've got Jose saying, great show, thanks. I have a screw-down Rolex. Does the daily unscrewing damage the O-rings and gaskets? A little bit. Here's the thing. One of the reasons Panerai developed its locking lever back in the late 40s and brought it into production in the 50s, Panerai's locking lever was a solution to the Rolex Oyster case and crown that was featured on the original 3646 combat watches. The original Panerai combat watches were made by Rolex. They were Oyster cases. They featured the same screw-down crown system, and they were all manual wind watches, which meant that on a daily basis, the users of the watches were screwing out the crown, winding the watch, and then screwing it back in. And this was wearing down the seals. It also puts wear and tear on the setting and winding mechanisms, but let's just talk about the seals. Panerai created the locking lever so it would only compress and decompress the seals. There would be no need to screw the crown out and screw it with its threaded stem back through the seal. So one of the reasons for that original Panerai locking lever was to preserve crown seals. And yes, if you're screwing the crown out on a daily basis or a regular basis, you will be significantly weakening those seals. So if you can avoid it, I would avoid it. And then right here, we have J-Dub saying, I'm usually in shorts and a t-shirt. Benjamin Burfield saying, spent too long on my mountain bike, but at least I'm catching the tail end of the show. You got plenty to go. And then right here, we've got Mr. Bud saying, I only collect Rolex sports watches, Panerai, and Patek sports watches. All right, guys, let's jump into, posted this concept shot of his Longines Hydro Conquest. This is also from the Tim Maso Facebook group. Join my Facebook group, open another window, get with the program. This is where we interact all day long and waste so much time at work. I swear I should be paying you. Talking time with Tim Maso, 800 strong. We're going for 4 figures. Andreas W. of Sweden chills off the Maldives in the Indian Ocean, crystal clear, with his Breitling Avenger GMT. And Bill C. of California continues our mini ocean theme with his Rolex Submariner. Now, upgrading the best, improving Rolex, the search engine concept. Where are the watches? That's a valid question. In a world where authorized dealers take possession of 100% of inventory, you might wonder where the watches are at any given time. And a search tool for customers and shoppers would help immensely. This isn't the same as online sales. Rolex does not sell watches online, and I don't believe it ever should. It's right to sell through authorized dealers and keep everything brick and mortar and face-to-face. But it would be nice to know where I should go if I want to buy a personal favorite face-to-face. And in the car world, we have a model for this. You go on Cadillac.com, and if, like me, you're searching for CT6Vs with the Blackwing V8, franchised auto dealers work very much like Rolex's private authorized dealers. If we can go back to the full screen for a second, Lexus or Cadillac, for example, or Mercedes-Benz, allow you to find inventory at private dealers on its company website, and then it directs you to the relevant dealer closest to you. A central research tool to find desired Rolex watches where they are for sale would have a lot of benefits to the customer. First, it would be a huge innovation in the watch space for the manufacturer to be able to vector sales directly to its dealers by helping them locate inventory. This would be great for the customers. This would be great for the dealers. Second, it would lower the average age of inventory because it would bring in a bigger pool of people, potentially to a smaller, possibly obscure and out-of-the-way dealer. By making it easier to find watches, you ensure that watches will sell more quickly, no matter how obscure the reference or the dealer. It would also improve yearly sell-through. We don't want to see last year's model in the case or the year prior. We want to see watches move quickly. And from a dealer standpoint, as well as an OEM manufacturer standpoint, that's very important. Improving sell-through to the client and the speed of sell-through is in everyone's best interest. potentially reducing the waiting list at Big Watch. And while it might not always be a simple matter to find an unsold steel Daytona or Rolex Hulk, there might be an Oyster Perpetual 39. There might be a yellow gold Daytona that somebody's just seeking in a big market but has already given up trying to find because his big market local dealers don't have it. Would you drive for an hour to pick a watch that would otherwise take a year to deliver? Would you drive 2 hours? A lot of people would. And by putting a search engine on the company website, you're allowing people to get instant gratification. You're also helping out smaller dealers that might ordinarily struggle if they're off the beaten path. It's the Route 66 scenario. Once the interstate arrives, a lot of people look elsewhere, and those big city dealers are a lot like the interstate. This would be a great move for smaller dealers and really help them out. And it would assist in the selling of heavy pieces. It's not just the odd Oyster Perpetual 39 or steel Datejust that you'll find off the beaten path. Sometimes you might have a guy in New York City who's looking to buy a full yellow gold, full bracelet Rolex Daytona, and yeah, he's willing to take a drive or even catch a flight out of the way to get it. But that person wouldn't know the watch he wants is at an obscure Midwestern Rolex dealer unless he had a way of locating it. But he doesn't know the watch is there. A search engine showing inventory would accomplish this. Let's take a look at your wrist shots. Peter W. of Kent in the UK cools with his Tudor Black Bay GMT during the heat of August, washing away the dog days of summer. Barry L. is a man after my own heart with watches and bikes, one for action and one for afterwards. If you're wearing the Geo on the bike, you're a braver man than me. We have Bob R. impressing with his Grand Seiko SBGH 273 fall dial, purchased from Watchbox. Thank you for trusting our company, Bob. Paul E. pegs the meter with his vintage Daytona 6263 Big Red and Porsche 993 Carrera 4S, last of the air-cooleds. Here is the car as a parting shot from Paul. Very nice. And yes, I'm jealous. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com. A few more ideas? I've got a couple. Embrace the vintage Rolex community. How cool would it be to see Rolex say, vintage Rolex collectors and scholars, we're with you. We're going to start providing community events and resources. Think about this. If there were collector events held by the factory itself, people would buy tickets around the globe to attend. Imagine Rolex reference books showing dial variants, production years, references, and production numbers, not from Papaleo or Goldberger or Patrizzi or Dowling or Mondani, but from Rolex. Everyone would have to buy that book. Imagine if you could tell exactly how many Big Crown 6200 Explorer dials were made, because it's in an authoritative guide published by Rolex. I don't care if we're inked in human blood and bound in flesh. Everyone would pre-order that book. Yes, you might have caught an Evil Dead reference right there. Okay, another idea. Certification services and service options for older Rolex watches. Rolex does have procedures for sorting and servicing these watches, but they're not always crystal clear. I once called Rolex in New York, the service center, and on the phone they were very clear that they do recognize historic references and they have a process and a pipeline for those. But from the outside looking in, it's not entirely clear as day. I think it would be super cool if Rolex were to embrace vintage entirely. They would instantly corner the market on that sort of thing. It would be a cool olive branch to the collector fraternity. Another idea, non-celebrity ambassadors. Now, I don't mean nobodies. I don't mean flaky weirdos. I do mean people who are not necessarily Roger Federer, Jackie Stewart, or Arnold Palmer. Going out on a limb, it would be very neat if Rolex would consider brand ambassadors for the company who are members of the watch community first and foremost, distinguished historians, collectors, authors, and even watchmakers with deep-seated connections and commitment to the Rolex world. This would be a really fascinating break from past precedent while remaining entirely consistent with Rolex's way of marketing its products. People who can stand out as exemplars to the Rolex community aren't always the best-known celebrities in the world. Sometimes they're you and they're me. So, if you want to buy a watch from the Watchbox, Maso@thewatchbox.com. If you've got ideas for how Rolex can get better than it is now, how great can become greater, let me know in the description below. And to continue this discussion on a different platform when the lights go dark, please join the Tim Maso Facebook group and continue the conversation. Comment and subscribe, guys. Thank you so much. Time out, Tim out, Rolex out, and thanks for logging on.